Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It is such a joy to have you here. I want to thank everyone who's worked so hard to put all of this together, our colleagues at Emerged. I have to shout them out for all the work that they've done, all the team at AAKOMA Project. And I am just so grateful to everyone, all the talent who's here with us tonight. This has been a labor of love, long time coming. And we're just so grateful to be able to share this evening with you. It is my pleasure to be here with you to open up for the AAKOMA Project, the nonprofit that I founded, for our event, Revelations, Uncovering Truths About the Mental Health of Youth of Color. It's a 2-day event. You're going to be with us for an hour tonight. I'm going to stop talking in about 30 seconds, but I want to share with you briefly just a couple things before I introduce our host, Dometi Pongo. So the AAKOMA Project is about 3 things: raising consciousness, empowering people, and changing the system of mental health with a particular focus on intersectional youth and young adults of color, meaning we try to be very, very intentional about inclusivity, right? So with all of that, let me pivot a little bit and share with you about our host tonight. And again, I'm just going to say to you, my name's Dr. Alfiee. I am the founder. I've been in the mental health space for about 25 years. I'm a researcher, scientist. I do quite a bit of media work, and obviously I'm the founder of this amazing organization. So shouts out again to all of our team, to all the talent, and to you for being here with us. You're going to have some amazing conversations this evening, and you're going to hear a lot of great information from our study, The State of Mental Health of Youth of Color, the full report, which is online. But let me pivot and introduce our host. So tonight, what I want you to hear from me is that we have one of the most amazing people I've ever met. He is such a kind, warm-hearted, beautiful, loving, amazing human being. He is a journalist and an executive producer whose work resides at the intersection of pop culture and social justice. No truer words have been spoken. He has traveled across the country leading impactful conversations on mental wellness, mental well-being. We had the chance to be together last year at the White House Mental Health Youth Action Forum put together by MTV and the Biden-Harris administration. Dometi Pongo always leads talks at this intersection of social impact and just taking care of people. In particular, for example, the Clinton Global Initiative. His empathetic approach to journalism obviously is felt in his award-winning commentary. If you have the chance to check him out, you must. It's a treat. And in his hosting work on MTV's True Life Crime. I'm just so excited to have him here with us, and I want to turn the floor over to Mr. Dometi Pongo.
Dr. Alfiee, it's an honor to be on with you, and thank you so much. When we met each other at the Mental Health Youth Action Forum, I was hoping we get an opportunity to work together, and I'm honored to be here tonight for the AAKOMA Project's Revelations. I mean, this is phenomenal. Excited to talk about a topic that affects all of us, and as you know, these are tough times, and protecting our mental health is paramount for everybody, including our young people. And not only do we have to keep them close, but when they talk, we really have to listen and keep them engaged in this ongoing conversation. So I promise you, we've got a great hour lined up for you guys. We've got discussions focused on the anxieties and the impacts of social media. Mala and Diosa of Locatora Radio will be joining us. Plus, we'll hear from mental health advocate and recent college grad, Zane Landon. Sounds fire, right? I hope so. First up, though, we've got an award-winning poet whose spoken word is known to stir emotions and enrich spirits. And tonight, it's going to bless us with a powerful spiritual word. Here is T Sleeveless.
Peace, y'all. I'm going to dive straight into this. Most men will only experience unconditional love from their mothers. And some of us don't even get that. Most of us have never even had appreciation or respect without conditions or hidden intentions. We don't know what it sounds like to hear, I see you, and I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're here. You really make a difference. Yet the expectation is to constantly be displaying the strength and love that the world is so hesitant in conveying. We're expected to have a thick skin but get judged if it turns to a hard shell. The first step in being a man is ignoring the hunger. Because yes, boy, you're going to be starving. Starved of attention, starved of affirmation, starved of love, starved of being told that you are enough. Step 2 in being a man is comfortability with replaceability. Because you are only as good as you are useful. You are only as valuable as you are needed by others. And should there ever come a day, boy, where you fail to provide everybody with a smiling face, then do not be surprised when they say all men do is take up space, and you are quickly replaced. Step 3 in being a man is overcoming your fear of the fire, because almost everything you will ever try to build will go up in flames. Relationships, careers, hobbies, and yes, you are always to blame. Step 4 in being a man is understanding that by the time you finally get all the right answers, the questions will have already changed, and you might achieve the strength of Herculean fiction, trying to balance the weight of all these contradictions. Be a man, they say. Definition unknown. Description keep changing. We men, so empty, so irritable, so this, so that. We get told what we are so much we've understood that who we are ain't even up to us. The blame is always on us regardless. One guilty man's actions requires an innocent man's explanation. Otherwise, you're all guilty by gender association. There are 4 times as many male suicidal ideations because it's been hammered in our head that we're falling short of our societal expectations. I mean, just imagine being in a world of hurt for 100 different reasons during a nationwide emasculation season. There's a unique brand of sadness that follows being hated without reason. It ain't no secret why such a high percentage of us have attempted to stop breathing. As the saying goes, every failure is one step closer to the successful attempt. And there is no such thing as an attempted suicide. A man's soul dies long before his body gets a chance to realize. A man with an old soul is just a boy that contemplated going ghost. For every woman that suffers the same fate, 4 men will follow her to the grave. And I tried to hide the stats from the poet because he might romanticize them. He might write a poem in place of the suicide notes that were never left behind because nobody taught him otherwise. So who's going to teach a boy to cry while he's still alive? A man with nothing to lose will view everything as something to take, and a child that isn't embraced by his village will burn the village down. And he will stare as everything that did not love him back contorts and cracks, and he will ease his way into the fire until he finally feels some warmth. Thank you.
I want parents, teachers, mental health practitioners, and caregivers to listen to this. Hi, my name is Zane Landon, and I'm a recent graduate from Cal Poly Pomona. I became a mental health advocate during my time as a university student after I experienced a massive decline in my mental health, and I didn't know what to do about it. Also, as a person of color, the voices of people of color need to be elevated because I understand how it feels to be left out, participate in a room where very few looked like me, and seeing very little representation on content about how people of color can navigate their mental health on top of everything else. Because when you carry many intersectional, underrepresented identities, it can create additional barriers than someone else who doesn't share those identities will experience.
Powerful, powerful. Zane, thank you for sharing your truth. And T Sleeveless, thank you for that work. Men of color don't have this conversation enough. I'm still thinking about the bars, Herculean fiction, of balancing these contradictions. Thank you for those words. But now for our first discussion of the evening, why youth today experience heightened anxiety and depression. And joining us are Dior Vargas, a queer Latina mental health activist, creator of the People of Color Mental Illness Photo Project, and the editor of The Color of My Mind. She's the recipient of a number of awards, including the White House Champion of Change for Disability Advocacy under the Obama administration. We've also got Dr. Stephanie N. Wang, a clinical psychologist, entrepreneur, and keynote speaker whose focus includes Asian American mental health and DEI training, as well as anxiety, depression, substance use, work-related stress, relationship, and cultural concerns. She's the founder and host of the award-winning podcast, Color of Success. And lastly, we have Gregory Allen Dentu Sindana, a dancer, strategist, best-selling author, and president of Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting and Education Fund. And he's also chief creative officer of Greg Dances and co-founder of the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation. Our moderator for this discussion is Dr. Judith Joseph, a renowned board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist who specializes in mental health and trauma. She also serves as the chair of Women in Medicine at Columbia University and clinical assistant professor at NYU Langone Medical Center. Let's dive into why today's young people are experiencing heightened anxiety and depression with this phenomenal panel.
Hey, my name is Brooke Simpson, and as an Indigenous woman who daily works to make my mental health a priority, I am honored to be partnering with the AAKOMA Project's The State of Mental Health of Youth of Color 2022 report to ask you, did you know 77.7% of girls, including trans girls, reported feeling anxious, worried, or nervous in the prior 7 days?
This is Mariah Gladstone, the founder of IndigiKitchen, an online teaching tool dedicated to re-indigenizing our diets. I'm also a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and a descendant of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. And I recognize that mental health is an incredibly important topic for Native people. Do you know that 59.7% of Native youth have reported experiencing moderate to severe anxiety or depression? You can learn about this statistic, among others, at the AAKOMA Project's The State of Mental Health of Youth of Color 2022 report.
Hi, I'm so excited to talk to you all about this today. And I know that you feel really strongly about this work. So we're just going to dive right in. So we'll start with you, Dr. Stephanie Wong. Tell us a little bit about why it feels important for you to do this type of work.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a mother of 2 young daughters, and I really want them to know that talking about your feelings is not a weakness, it's a strength. And right now, there are so many young people that have gone through so many things due to the pandemic, et cetera, and the intersectionality. So I really want to show them that women of color can do anything. In addition, when I was in high school, I won't date myself and say when, we had a student suicide at our magnet school, and it was 90% Asian approximately. And there were no resources available. So it's really important for me to be a cultural broker and help those in our communities that are feeling very stigmatized for even talking about this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's really important. You know, from the numbers from the AAKOMA Project, we know that suicidality is a real mental health crisis. Dr. Vargas, can you please tell us a bit about what makes you feel so strongly about this type of work?
Well, again, I wanted to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity to share my story and also just to share the space with you all. I have a personal connection to this work. I grew up experiencing anxiety and depression, and I also identify as a suicide attempt survivor. So these are things that I had experienced throughout most of my childhood into my adolescence. And so just to be part of that experience and also to know that there are so many other youth of color who are experiencing the same thing, it's something that I want to bring more light to. I think very often we're raised to believe that pain and suffering is a rite of passage, and really it shouldn't be. It's about our resilience, while there is a cost, but about the strength and the protective factors that we have within our communities and because of our culture. So it's extremely important that we talk about these issues and really take away the shame and stigma surrounding it.
Absolutely right. Shame and stigma get in the way of treatment and asking for help. And we know that our communities tend to mask that. Gregory, tell us a bit about what you are excited about to talk about tonight.
Yes, well, first, thank you so much to Dr. Alfiee and the AAKOMA Project for having me. Super grateful to be here. As many folks know, May is not only Mental Health Awareness Month, but it's also Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So as a proud Filipino and coming from an immigrant family, I like to say mabuhay with a little flair. And I'm here excited to talk a little bit about not only the current conditions that we are living in, but also the vision of the kind of world that I hope that what we can live in. I think it's clear that we are navigating multiple crises at this time. Everything from global warming and a climate emergency. We're still living in an ongoing pandemic, police and gun violence, unprecedented economic equality. And I have to also mention the growing conservatism and authoritarianism in government. And I think all of these things coming together create the kind of conditions that folks are in now. And so I also think about, even in the midst of the violence and the harm that's being caused to our people, that there's still a lot of hope, a lot of joy. And I envision a world where we can not only survive, but we can thrive, and where we can be free and live with radical joy. And we all have access to holistic wellness. So I'm excited about tackling some of these issues and crises head on, while staying rooted and grounded in community and the radical joy and care that I know that we have for one another.
We know that you do a lot of advocacy work. Tell us about some of the treatment barriers that communities of color face, and tell us about specific challenges they face.
So there are a lot of barriers that all youth and even adults experience when it comes to accessing mental health care. But I think that there are nuances when it comes to people of color and youth of color, given that this is the topic we're focused on. And I'll speak for the Latinx community, where two of those include immigration status and language barriers. Sometimes when people are undocumented, they're afraid to get that help for fear of any sort of retaliation or a sense where they could be deported back to where they came from. Then there's also the language barriers, where sometimes they may not have English as their original language. And so there are a lot of things that come into play where you're unable to get that support. The stigma alone prevents you from getting that care. But then trying to find a provider that is understanding of your cultural background, and specifically when it comes to language barriers, it just makes it very hard for people to get the help that they need. And so it prevents them from going away from those generational wounds, the generational trauma, and it just continues that cycle of silence and shame. And so those are just a few of those barriers that I'll speak to when it comes to the Latinx community.
And Dr. Stephanie, as a clinician and a psychologist, we know that there are inherent biases within healthcare. Can you please speak about how that can be harmful to communities of color and youth of color?
Absolutely. There are a very limited number of providers that provide cultural humility in their treatment. And there is a really huge gap there, because it creates a barrier in creating trust between patients, clients, and providers, because we don't necessarily feel understood or represented. And while Therapist Match is not like a end all and be all of the efficacy of treatment, it is important in terms of building relationships, trust, and engagement. So we want to decrease the probability that people will terminate early. And so what we really need to do is encourage more people to become mental health providers, so we can see ourselves reflected in the people that we are trying to serve. Back to Dior's thoughts about immigration status and all that, it also impacts the AAPI community, because there's this generational transmission, which is a cultural barrier, that if you go to therapy, you are crazy, and that you shouldn't really talk outside of the family about problems. And so then if you're being asked to go into institutions that have institutional racism on a systemic level, who are they going to trust when they are trying to be vulnerable? So I think cultural mismatch a lot of the times happens.
Yeah, and we know from recent reports that sometimes there are no providers for miles. So you add that on top of very few providers, and then even fewer who look and somehow are kind of relatable to you, then there's an additional barrier. So Gregory, can you please tell us 2 ways you can determine if a provider is culturally responsive?
Yeah, well, first, I want to just lift up what Dior and Dr. Wong are saying, and that those are relevant experiences that I had growing up. I grew up in an immigrant Filipino working class family and household, and it was something that I had to really unlearn. And even as I went to explore my own experience and try to be on my own mental health journey, some of the initial clinicians and therapists that I had reached out to weren't actually the best match. And so everything from, at least for me, how I approach finding folks is asking questions about familiarity with immigrant background, familiarity with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender and queer community. I don't identify as gay and queer myself. And also being able to navigate understanding and how systems impact those communities. Because I think having a lived experience, navigating those identities within institutions and supporting folks as they do that, I think are particular kinds of experiences, and there's some nuance into that. And so those are the kinds of things I explore and try to ask about, and also what I encourage others to ask about as they explore and find services and support that will be culturally relevant to them.
And, if you're with a provider and you don't feel heard and validated, that's a red flag. What is one thing you wish more people knew about anxiety and depression in youth of color? Dior, maybe you want to take that question?
Definitely. I think it's important that we realize that it exists, that it's valid, that it can appear differently across different cultures, and that it's not something that people should be ashamed of expressing, that we should be having these conversations on a regular basis so that when it is brought up, when maybe someone is going through a crisis, maybe they don't even have to get to that point, but if they do, that it's not something that's out of the norm, and that you will feel prepared enough to be able to take the next steps in order to address the concerns that that individual is experiencing. So definitely validating it.
Validation is key. If we don't validate how we feel, how can we do anything about it? And Dr. Stephanie, what have you noticed about youth experiencing anxiety and depression, specifically youth of color?
Well, I wasn't surprised by the numbers that I saw in the project. I think most of us on the panel were not surprised, but this is information that needs to be documented and disseminated. And we're living in unprecedented times. Like, I can't even imagine being a youth right now with AI, social media. There's not only bullying in person, there's bullying online. There's just so many different layers. With the pandemic, many young people were obviously sheltered in place, and that really limits the ability to socialize with others and understand that humans need other humans. I mean, even not just youth of color, but adults, right? Like, we have been away from so many people for so long, and it's created this baseline level of anxiety and depression. And add that to hormones, food insecurity, homelessness, racism, the isms, all of it. And you do have kind of a recipe for increased risk for anxiety and depression. So as providers, activists, et cetera, friends, family, we really need to think about the preventative measures, interventions, and just basic love and support for one another. Everyone is going through something, and to be and approach people with curiosity versus judgment.
It sounds like normalizing this experience is helpful. And it also sounds like it's virtually impossible to address our youth if we're not really talking with their parents and their family members, because we're all experiencing this, right? I want each of you to take your time, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer this question. If you could share one tool to teach young people to help them care for their mental health, just one, tell us about that. We can start with you, Gregory.
So as a dancer and as a creative, I think one thing that I would offer is taking time to dance and do something creative, whether it's art, poetry, painting. It's definitely something that I find is helpful to keep my mind off of other things that are going on, but also brings me joy, and also I think invites and helps create the conditions for other folks to feel like they could also be enjoyed and be creative and take that time and space for themselves.
Movement is medicine for sure, especially music, right? We know that parts of our brain lights up and heals when we're moving and when we listen to music. So thank you. Dior, do you want to share your one tool with us, please?
It's hard to narrow it down to one tool. I guess just thinking about a self-care kit of sorts, something where it could be a shoebox, and maybe that seems a little old school. Maybe youth are more into digital types of tools, but just thinking about things that you can do that are tangible, that you can feel, maybe lavender oil. And sometimes these things can be a little like, oh, well, it's like yoga or exercise, but no, these are things that are helpful to people, and you have to learn what works best for you. But having some sort of tangible box or kit where you can have poems that you've written, or a stuffed animal that you got as a kid from a loved one, a list of people that you can reach out to. Just having all of those items available to you, so when you are going through something, you can easily reach it. And then it's when you're going through something, I know for me, I don't want to have to do any extra work. I don't want to have to think. I just want things to be as easy as possible. So if you're able to do that work prior to having an episode or any sort of experience, that it'll make the process a lot easier. And I think it's also important to have someone help you in creating that kit, so it's not a solitary experience.
You have your shoebox. Some people have their little purse. Some people have a wallet with their coping cards. The tangible items are evidence-based. There's things that light up parts of your brain that allow you to cope. The sensory things that you talked about, all very helpful. Thank you. And lastly, Dr. Stephanie, can you please tell us your one coping skill?
Well, I have to say I loved all of those. And Gregory, I'm going to call it out because I karaoke every day. So I guess you're going to teach me how to K-pop dance and all that. I could sing. The dancing, not so much. So we'll get to that. But I would say self-compassion. And I really want to facilitate this in my children as well. If you make a mistake, tell yourself that you're still learning. And that goes for pretty much all people, because we are harder on ourselves than other people. And so if we can take a moment and speak kindly to ourselves as we would someone else, that really makes a big difference.
It does. Giving ourselves grace goes a long way. And that practice of gratitude, we talk about it, giving gratitude to others. We need to thank ourselves sometimes, right? You all, thank you so much. This was so informative, and you shared such useful things for our youth of color, and it was such a pleasure speaking with you all. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Joseph, thank you so much for leading that discussion. And thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your honest thoughts and opinions about anxiety and depression, not only in terms of what we experience as individuals, but how our cultural identities add some nuance to what access to care looks like for us specifically. I should have said this at the top. Take some notes, because they're giving actionable tools in each of these panels, man. It's so important. And also important is our next topic, social media. We're all glued to our devices almost all the time. That's just a fact. Whether it's working or we're studying or searching for our favorite playlist, we're constantly staring at these screens. And then, of course, there's social media, which has become an addiction, especially for some young people. Joining us for the discussion, the impact of social media overuse on youth today, are Rachel Laico, an award-winning queer Filipina-American filmmaker, actress, and activist. And she's also the founder of Empower House, which is a mission-driven company that aims to empower storytellers through creativity and community. We've also got Bhavya Rai. Hey, girl. I remember her from the White House. She leads the mental health community in Elegancies and has launched a podcast called Off the Pedestal. She was recognized by both MTV and the White House, that's what I was talking about, for her work with young people, and is just a phenomenal individual. And last but certainly not least, Matthew Coelho, phenomenal singer, songwriter, LGBTQ plus advocate, and founder of the thriving online community, Well Minded. He is also dedicated to supporting at-risk youth in his local community in Tucson, Arizona. And leading this discussion is Trent Out Loud, an award-winning entrepreneur and the founder of Exclusivity. He's been credited for helping to lay the groundwork for sneaker culture in Canada too. I got to see I'm gonna go on your Instagram, see how you coming. Before we dive into this discussion, let's hear from Diosa and Mala from Live with Locatora Radio.
Hi, hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Diosa.
And I'm Mala.
And we are the hosts of Locatora Radio, a radiophonic novela.
Which is just a very extra way of saying a podcast.
So we are so excited to be chatting with you all today about social media and mental health. We have been online for practically our entire lives, but we founded the podcast in 2016. And at that time, we both worked in mental health adjacent fields, Mala at a rape crisis center, and myself as a community organizer. And a lot of our podcast episodes and interviews have delved into the issues of social justice, health and wellness, and of course, mental health. We have focused our podcast topics on the experiences of women, people of color, and queer communities because over the past 7 years, our podcast has reached listeners across the country.
And over the years, as we've talked about issues important to women, to people of color, and to our communities, our listeners have reached out to us and have written to us to say that our podcast, Locatora Radio, and the conversations that we have about Latinidad, mental health, and self-care, that those conversations on the podcast have made our listeners feel less alone and less isolated during rough times in their lives, especially if they're off in college, they're living abroad, they're far away from home, or they just feel like nobody understands them. The podcast has been a way to connect people on that wellness level.
Absolutely. And I think for us, the podcast was also an outlet for our own mental health, our own creativity, and our own expression because we were working very intense jobs in the nonprofit sector. We needed that outlet, that space. And so very much our early episodes are informed by our own experiences working at these different types of jobs.
And we came to find that podcasting was a great avenue for expression, for connection, for creating community. And we know now, after 7 seasons of podcasting, and we went from being an indie podcast covering these topics to now being a podcast that is signed with iHeartMedia, continuing to discuss these topics. We know that podcasts can be great spaces for discussing our diverse life experiences, and the ways that we cope with challenging situations and feelings. But we're not the only podcast out there that centers health and wellness. So we recommend that you check out these other mental health focused podcasts that are made for and hosted by youth and people of color. So we have a couple shows for you that we're going to share that we think you guys should subscribe to and check them out. The first is Teenager Therapy, which is hosted by several Gotham Award-winning Latinx teenagers from Southern California. And Teenager Therapy is described as a podcast that's a coming-of-age story portrayed in real time.
Next is Latinx Therapy, which is one of our faves. And that podcast is about destigmatizing mental health in the Latinx community through bilingual podcasts and a database.
There's also a really great mental health show called Yeah, No, I'm Not Okay by LAist Studios, hosted by an actress from Orange is the New Black, Diane Guerrero. And Yeah, No, I'm Not Okay is a podcast that explores issues that youth face all over the world, like addiction, depression, anxiety, suicide, radical self-love, and more.
And another podcast by LAist Studios is Wild. It's a podcast about growing up and also falling in love. And they also touch on the different obstacles that people were facing during the pandemic, co-hosted by Erica Lindo and Megan Tan.
And of course, an excellent podcast, Therapy for Black Girls. The Therapy for Black Girls podcast is a weekly conversation with Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, a licensed psychologist in Atlanta, Georgia. covering all things mental health, personal development, and all the small decisions we can make to become the best possible versions of ourselves. So if you're looking for a podcast to listen to that dives into mental health, where you can hear from other people across the spectrum of life, these are some shows to look into.
Yes, and we also want to remind everyone watching from home that podcasts and social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram are amazing resources to begin talking about mental health. But remember that they're not substitutes for therapy practices, or talking to a licensed professional. And while I love scrolling on Instagram and scrolling on TikTok, and I resonate with a lot of amazing content and social media posts about mental health, diagnoses, and awareness. They're all incredible. I think it's really important that we also ask ourselves the following things. Is this person posting, sharing a licensed professional? And if not, that's okay. But are they sharing from their own personal experience, or are they making general claims? Are they citing a study? And if they are, is it sourced? And are they trying to tell you something? Are they trying to sell you something? We think that those are super important things to kind of a list to run through when you're on social media and you're watching all of the amazing content put out by amazing creators. But it's really important that we vet our sources and we know who's making certain claims.
And even though podcasting is our life, it's our job, it's our favorite thing to do, really, and we've been online for years now, we also know that health and wellness are not a one-sided indoor thing. In order to keep ourselves mentally and emotionally healthy, we need to do more than just listen to a podcast or scroll on TikTok. We also do need to get out into the world and enjoy our surroundings, our environment. So something that we've learned over the years, although we grew up on the internet and our business is on the internet and our work is on the internet, we've learned that it's still really important to get out into the world, go take a class, learn something new, learn how to crochet, take a sewing class, get outside, literally touch grass, take in the sun, connect in person with friends and family. Connecting online is great, but there's nothing like in-person human interaction. Go to a new park, explore your city or community, go to an open mic and get into slam poetry or stand-up comedy, read a new book, pick up a new hobby. All of these things do wonders for our mental health and supplement the things that we might be learning or consuming online.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for listening us today. We're so happy that we got to share space with y'all virtually. I'm Diosa.
And I'm Mala.
You can tune in at locatora_radio on all social media platforms and follow us on social media.
Thank you.
Out loud. Are we live? Yes. All right. Okay, cool. Welcome to the impact of social media on our youth today. I'm really excited about this segment because I need just as much help as you guys do from our panelists because I am addicted to social media. In this segment today, we are going to try to help you realize 3 key things. Okay. 1, the warning signs of social media and the addictions and overuse. 2, recognizing the negative effects of excessive social media use. And 3, developing healthy social media habits. That's something that I really need. Before I get started, I just wanted to highlight 3 key stats from some of the information that Dr. Alfiee and her team put together, and they gave us a lot of stuff to read. So the 3 key takeaways for me were 44% of youth of color have reported that they do not see enough of themselves on social media and people who look like them. And 27% do not think there's enough people of color on social media. I thought that was a really interesting stat. 25% of youth of color have been bullied, and 10% have been threatened by violence because of their race. Lastly, 26% have reported that they have tried to cut down on social media use and has not been successful. I'm part of that 26%. Anyway, so those are the 3 things that we're going to try to cover, and let's get started. Hello, Rachel, Bhavya, and Matt. How are you?
Doing great. Well. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Thanks for having us.
So, yes, thanks for being here. Okay, so we're going to start out. We don't have a lot of time, so I have a couple of questions. We're going to try to have you guys answer most of them. Some I'll segment it out. Okay, but this one I want everybody to try to answer. Have we gone off the Richter scale? Like, do we need to get young people completely off of social media? Rachel, you can start.
Yeah, I believe, short, simple answer, no. I think with everything, there are pros and cons to social media. And for me, I'm definitely an optimist, and I believe that social media is such a beautiful, powerful tool in terms of sharing knowledge and being able to connect, and most importantly, like today, being able to talk about mental health and important topics in a larger scale and having it reach so many people around the world. I think that's really beautiful. But at the same time, we do need to know our boundaries with social media and understand ourselves and become aware of, okay, when does it get to a point where we need to limit ourselves and also limit the kinds of content that we're consuming, because then that can also become a very negative impact on our own mental health.
Understood. Matt, nice background, by the way, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. It's such a pleasure to be with you all to be discussing this topic. Hugely important. I would have to agree in the short and simple no.
Okay.
Social media, to Rachel's point, is such a powerful tool, especially in today's day and age where we have certain entities trying to keep information, really important, relevant information for large populations of America and of youth today. And it's such a great tool for us to receive information and to share it, to Rachel's point, at such a large scale. I think we're in a time where we're still seeing such new and exciting things come from the use of social media, whether somebody's an influencer or they're partnering with a brand, and there's this just exciting, great content. And I don't know that we've really fully reached the level of taking the complete stop to really reflect fully on its ultimate impact. But I think having this discussion is such a great sign that we're starting to, and it has been such a great topic of conversation. But it's definitely something that needs to be continued to talk about.
Okay. Bhavya?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for having me among you all. It's such an honor to be here. But yeah, short and sweet as well. I do think, no, I don't think we need to get them completely, I say me as well, like off social media. But like, I did a poll a long time ago in my own Instagram audience. I remember it was something that was just saying, do you enjoy using social media? And I remember in my little subset of people who were watching, following, reading that, 90% said no, and 10% said yes, they were enjoying it. And I was very interested in looking at who was enjoying their time on social media. And I did a little research in just those answers, and I was like looking into those people. And a lot of those people were people I admired and really like enjoyed their content. And what I realized was like those people were people who were using social media as an intentional space. And they were there for whether it was vintage clothing that they were surrounding their, Instagram with, or whether they were into a particular topic. We all deserve to have fun, and it can be a source of entertainment. But
curating that space intentionally with what is coming up on our feeds is so, so important. So I do think that I've done the same kind of, because I like to be around creatives, mental health people, I like all kinds of things. But the people who, what you interact with most is really based on your actions on social media itself. So it was a small subset. I don't know how much that is representative of what the rest of youth is doing, but it did. I do think that there's a rethinking, as Matt was saying, that needs to be done about how it's being used in the first place. But social media is a wonderful tool. It just depends on how we start to use it.
Okay, so we haven't gone off the cliff yet, but we need to put like a big warning sign, right? So Matt, can you tell us some of the ways you'd recommend how we manage to use social media better?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely have to agree with Bhavya. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Perfect.
Yeah, I DM'd her to ask her the same thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Like, send me a voice note how to pronounce it.
Yeah, using it intentionally, it's being mindful and intentional about, not only how we're using social media, but how we're communicating and showing up in the world in all capacities, whether it's our digital selves or, how we show up in a room. It's what are we looking to communicate? What are we looking to receive? And how are we wanting to feel when we're putting, those pieces of ourselves out there? I think that's a huge part of how we're using social media, is with that intentional aspect.
Okay. This is one I'd like to have all of you guys answer. What is one thing you wish more people knew about social media, mental health, and youth of color? Rachel?
Wow, it's such a big question because there's a lot.
I know. That's why I would love to have all of you kind of tackle it.
Yeah. This isn't more so, I wish people knew, because I think people already know this, but I think we just need to do a better job of being more conscious and aware of our own selves. And in terms of social media, and back to Bhavya's point as well, which was something I was going to bring up, is, what is our purpose with social media? What is our intention? Why are we on it? Because I think, especially the youth of color today, they're growing up in this generation of social media. And I didn't have that when I was growing up. I grew up in 90s, and I didn't have a phone until I was like middle school, right? And, I have a younger sister, and she is so different from me. Grew up with is always on her phone. Don't know what she's looking at, but there's so much information. There's so many things out there, and we're not taught how to, or we don't teach the youth how to use social media. So I think, it's up to us and our educators and, everyone that cares about this to kind of create that, create that line and to be able to showcase to our youth, how are we, how can we do it in a way that benefits us and benefits the next generations of, influencers, social media, content creators, and also consumers.
Understood. Bhavya, I'll shorten the question for you. What's one thing you wish people knew more just about mental health?
That's a great question. I think you have to, as Rachel was kind of speaking about too, you have to fill your own bucket first. That's something that's really, really important, and something that I really wasn't acquainted with that kind of idea until I went through my own mental health struggles in college. And I think when I hit rock bottom and I was at the point where I had no choice but to take ownership of what was going on around me, or everything would fall apart. And it had to be my choice. If I want to be my own savior here, that's going to be the option, or we can just give up. And when I had to focus on myself, that's the first time I actually chose to. And I think that remembering that you have the choice to put yourself first and understand it's that self-care is so important to do. Then when you choose to consume other people's social media, it can become a tool. How I kind of use it, it's more for creativity and expression once in a while, or it can be to put out work that I'm doing, or it can be entertainment, right? It can be TV or books or festivals, whatever you find enjoyment in. You can use it in that way more as kind of a more objective thing, as opposed to
Yes.
something that's directly feeding every thought, fact, opinion that you have. You have to take what's out there with such a big grain of salt. And like, I think that social media is, like, for me personally, it's an outlet to be weird. Like, I think that more like, you don't need permission to be weird,
Yeah.
but like, if you needed it, here it is. Be weird. Like, don't find your fun in it, and don't feel the need to hold back, because in my opinion, well, it's just that the people who don't really resonate with that will fall away anyway, and you can choose who you want to consume in terms of content. So in terms of your personal values of what you're using it for, take some time to just think about it. Like, why are you using it? How do you consume it? How much time do you spend on it? And because I did think about that a lot before.
Yeah.
And I think now it's kind of become a nice, fun space for me because of that. And I admire everybody that I follow and whatnot. So I'm grateful for it, as opposed to feeling burdened by it now. But that took a couple of years and my own journey to get there. So
Nice.
that's what I'll say on that.
Matt, what's the one thing that you wish people knew about youth of color?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What's one thing you wish more people knew about youth of color?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as it relates to social media, I would say there are a lot of things that a lot of people don't really quite think about. You know, representation is a huge factor to me. You know, when we're so consumed daily by you know, the feed and things that we follow, and how we're interacting and showing up in these digital spaces, I think that it's you know, super important for people to think about, you know, putting themselves in the shoes of youth of color and how they're being represented, and how they may even feel, you know, not represented, and what that might be giving them in a sense of feeling. You know, that sense of erasure and lack of having like a role model that they would see themselves in could potentially do a lot of damage and a lot of harm, really negatively impacting their own self-worth and how they value themselves and how they show up in the world. I think that's something to consider as you're, you know, as those of you out there who are using social media, kind of continue to keep an eye out for.
I love that answer. It's been my favorite answer so far. Put yourself in the shoes of the youth of color. Think about what they're going through and the life that they're leading. I love that answer. Okay, Rachel, could you give me one tool that you teach young people to help them with their mental health?
One tool for me, I'm gonna say what has helped me the most throughout my journey is breath work and meditation, and having a solid routine for yourself, you know, and understanding again what works for you, because it could be different from what works with me. But I have found that just starting off my day with even 5 minutes of breath work and meditation just solidifies my day and creates this like calm, peace, grounded energy for me to start my day with. And it has changed my life dramatically. And you know, throughout the day, if I, especially when I'm content creating and doing social media and whatnot, and I can forget my intention, I just go back to what was my intention today? What was I feeling? And going back to that grounded space. So I think meditation and breath work is such a beautiful, powerful tool, and has helped me not just in my own personal life and mental health, but also in my creativity.
Yeah, I love that answer. I follow Dr. Alfiee on her Instagram. She always giving a lot of good advice on meditation. And somebody like me, as a guy, as a Black man, I'm like, man, I'm not meditating. I'm not doing. I literally do breath work and meditation 5 or 10 minutes a day, and it's literally changed my life. If you asked me 2 years ago, I'd tell you I'm not meditating. So yeah, I second that. Try to meditate, even if it's 2 or 3 minutes, and you'll build up to, you know, a greater time. So yes, I love that advice. Okay, lastly, I hope I'm not running over time. Like, no one's texting me or anything, so I'm good. I want to have all of you three answer this if possible. Can you please tell me a little bit about why your work that you do for youth of color and mental health is so important to you? Why do you give up your Tuesday evenings and you have a million other things to do? Why is it so important for you? We'll start out with you, Bhavya.
Yeah, thank you. I think that my story of what I went through in college was just so significant to me that I went to other jobs, came back, tried different things, and that story is what I just kept coming back to. And I think that when you've gone through something yourself and you've been through something that you know is very specific, and for me personally, it was dealing with ADD, anxiety, comorbid depression in college, and understanding that it was a real thing, and understanding that, okay, as a South Asian woman, nobody has talked about this with me in my entire life. And I just, as I thought it wasn't real, I thought nobody around me in authority would think it was real. And there would be no way to kind of like accommodate that. But there are resources. There are plenty of people who will help you in the homeschool and workplace. And the truth is, if you know that there will be people that are judging you for it, then you can confide in certain people. You don't have to let every single person know, but finding this space is where I felt the most comfort in. And I think that if I didn't take that journey and help the people who are currently going through it, I would feel like I feel like that's just where I found most of my purpose. So I am amplifying it through my show that's coming out on Mental Health Action Day on May 18th. That's where I'm going to share from front to back, like the story that I first went through. And then I bring in therapists, psychologists, actors, like people from all different realms who are talking about short, quick stories about change that happened in their life because of a certain moment. But then we go into kind of a rapid fire fun game show round just to kind of humanize that person and remember that we're all like, we all deserve to have fun, as I said earlier, and that we think we are so different from one another, but we truly are not at the core. So I think that finding that empathy is really the thing that drives me at the end of the day. So through that show, I just hope I learn, and I love to talk. So that's where those kind of interests merge for me.
We could tell.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do this year. So thank you for all of your support and having me on here. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work. Matt, quickly, 20 seconds.
In a nutshell, I would just say that, having a sense of inclusion and feeling that sense of belonging and representation is super important for people of color, especially youth of color. I didn't have a representation like myself when I was younger. And I think today, especially with social media, it's such an important thing that I could be doing myself, is to provide an example for somebody who might be watching.
Rachel, you have the last word. Thank you, Matt. Rachel, go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I echo everything that was said here. As a queer Filipino American, I too did not have a role model. I didn't have a guide growing up. And when I was going through such a rough time in my mental health, experiencing depression, suicidal thoughts, and complex PTSD, all these things, it was such a struggle because I didn't know how to get help first. And now that I'm on the other side of it, that is my purpose, my mission. And I want to help and educate youth of color, especially, and queer API, women of color, and everyone really to, understand themselves, know the process, understand where to start. And I use my creativity to do that, to speak about mental health. And that's why I create on social media and also create films and TV shows about it.
Amazing. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Dr. Alfiee. Thank you, AAKOMA Project. Thank you, Olivia. We love y'all. Peace. We out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's fire. I'm keeping a round of applause going, man. Thank you guys for that phenomenal discussion. And Trent, I'm like you. At first, I wasn't thinking about meditation, but I changed picking up my phone in the morning to doing a 5-minute just grounding of myself. And it has worked wonders in my life. That and all of the advice that you gave was invaluable to each of our participants, from each of our participants. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And we appreciate everyone who registered and joined us tonight as well. We hope you learned a lot more about what our young people are enduring, as well as how we can help them navigate their way in this world. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Alfiee, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm not lying when I tell you I learned a lot. I got my notepad right here taking notes because there was so much actionable information that made me feel empowered as well. So thank you so much for a phenomenal evening.
So I just am so grateful to you, my friend Dometi. I'm always telling you, you're a rock star. So I just sit in awe every time I have the chance to be with you. And I'm fighting back tears because this has just been such a great night. Like, you're such a personality, and for you to give us your time in this way, I'm so deeply grateful. So I want to also say to everyone who joined us tonight, how much I appreciate all of you. Like, I really don't even have the words. I'm getting a little choked up. And that final thing I want to share with you all, in addition to my deepest thanks, is that I want to invite everyone to come back tomorrow for day 2. We're going to talk a little bit about racial trauma and a really big issue, suicidal ideation and treatment for our young people of color. And I really want to encourage everyone to please join us at AAKOMAproject.org and on our socials at AAKOMA Project. And the final thing I want to say with you, in addition to saying thanks again to Dometi and everyone who's been so phenomenal tonight, is that I always end by wishing people lots of love and light. And as we've seen tonight, there's a lot of opportunity for that love and light to be informed by good, culturally relevant science. So come back tomorrow for more of that science. Thank you again, Dometi. Thank you to all of our guests. And I just want to wish everybody peace and blessings. Thank you for being here.